Welcome to Living on the Edge. This is episode 6 in a parenting series entitled House or Home? God's Blueprint for Great Parenting. And when you talk about parenting, most of us think about, what do we do for our kids when they're small, or how do we handle those teenage years? But when you're 30 or 40 or even older, you know what? You're still a child of someone. One of the toughest issues to tackle is, as an adult, how do you honor your mom and dad? In fact, with some of the dysfunctions that we've come from, it can be a sticky, difficult issue. Want to learn how to honor your folks, please God, and deal with some tough stuff? Stay with me. That's today on Living on the Edge. We've got parents now that don't confront their teenagers. Well, it's just a phase they're going through. I hear in church parking lots, kids talk back, cuss their parents, slam the door. And they've been in my office going, what can I do? What can I do? Everything's falling apart. And it's like, they're in these handcuffs. I said, well, can I ask you a couple questions? Sure. Whose car are they driving? Mine. Who puts the gas in the car? Me. Whose phone are they using? Mine. Who has the contract on it? Me. Who pays for it? Me. Whose laptop are they using? Mine. Whose tuition is being paid by? And you're telling me you can't do anything? You don't want to do anything. What you don't want is a conflict. They didn't get this disrespectful overnight. By the way, if you happen to have small kids, this stuff about love and limits. If you have a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old that just seems like just really tough on the limits, and you just think this is too big of a headache, add 10 years. Add 10 years. It'll get you up off the lazy boy. Because it's a lot easier to set limits on 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds than it is on 16 and 18-year-olds. And so all I'm saying is, you have biblical grounds. You need to do it under control. Because part of it, then we get in this power stuff. Because the flip side of this is, I talk to teenagers. Man, I hear what you're saying, Pastor, but man, my parents say this, and they say for me to get off, they're on the phone more than I am. And you know what? I hear them in the back bedroom yelling and cussing each other. I walk in on my dad, and he's watching stuff I know isn't any good. So, God's really clear. Children, honor your parents, teens and young adults, by respecting and cooperating. Parents, be worthy of respect. Live a life worthy of respect. The rules haven't changed because they're teenagers or young adults. More is caught than taught. And someone said earlier, we're late all the time. Guess what? I guess our kids are going to be late all the time. I'm sloppy with what I put in my mind. Guess what? Your kids will be sloppy with putting in their mind. If you have debts that you haven't paid and you're not disciplined with your finances, guess what? Don't be shocked that freshman year when they get that credit card and they start spending it and you have these big bills because you co-signed, or because of their relationship with you, you're liable. Last year, are you ready for this? More college students went bankrupt than graduated from college. But when you're a freshman, they give you a t-shirt, a credit card, $5,000 credit. Woo! Are you kidding me? Well, who taught them? Who taught them? And so I'd say to those young adults, you need to be very, very careful. This might be one if you have a young adult or a teenager and you say to yourself, son or daughter, I know we may disagree on a number of things, but here's the deal. You need to respect me. And I heard some teaching that might be helpful, and maybe you put the CD in the car and take a little drive and grab a cup of coffee. And when you get done, you say, so what do you think? Or you watch the DVD and you jot a couple notes. And what I would say to your teenager or to your young adult is, are you respecting your parents in the area of your speech? Before God. If God's looking into your heart, how do you speak about your parents? Are you respecting in the area of your dress? That's always a big one, isn't it? Yes. And I don't mean how you dress in front of your parents. I mean after you leave and your backpack and you change clothes in the bathroom at college or at high school. Are you respecting your parents with your attitude, with your body language? How about those gray areas like music, movies, friends, Facebook, tweets? If your parents could see all that goes out, does it? You don't have to agree with them, but does it respect them? Guess what? You'll get your day. You'll get a day when you get to pay all your bills. You can be your own man, be your own woman, call your own shots. But right now, you're not doing that. And until you get your day, you respect and cooperate with your parents. And if not, you're disobedient to God. Are you respecting them in your chores, in your school, and in your work? Now, part of the revolution that has occurred, my son will talk about this with me tonight, this very helpful, is most of your kids, even younger ones, are smarter than you in technology. And that's created this sense of, I don't need you. I mean, I don't need God, I don't need you, I got Google. Just name it, just put it in the search, and they can get places, they know how it works, and there's sort of this little arrogant superiority that comes. I mean, and sometimes it's, on my end, it's like saying to one of my even young kids, could you fix this for me? I don't know how this thing works. But what happens with technology is they now think they're smarter than you, and what's knowledge do? It puffs up. There's an arrogance. And here's what I'd say to your teenager and young adult. Jesus knew a lot more than his mom and dad. I'm going to just go on record. He was smarter than Mary and Joseph combined. And he obeyed them. And he respected them because he understood God had placed them over him for that season. So this honoring your father and mother is at the fabric and the core of the stability of family and life. And when you're a small child, the way you do it is you obey mom and dad. When you're a teen and a young adult, you respect and cooperate. And then when you get where a lot of us are, and we're full-blown adults, right? He's going to say, it shifts. Look on your notes. Third, as an adult, I honor my parents by affirmation and provision. Affirmation and provision. Proverbs 23:24 says, the father of a righteous man has great joy. He who has a wise son delights in him. I want to say that when we're in our 30s and late 20s and when we're in our 40s and on, the greatest way we affirm our parents is by our life and by our words. The greatest gift you can give your parents. You're 40 and they're 65, or you're 30 and they're, 50-something. Or you're 55 or 60 and they're in their 80s. The greatest gift you'll ever give your parents as an adult is to be a godly, righteous man or woman. It's your character. See, when parents are young, we vicariously think that our kids' success is a direct reflection on us, and we live vicariously, and we want them to be, in certain schools and win certain trophies and have upwardly mobile jobs and go to schools that we try and do it in a sophisticated way. If you're a Christian, to talk about what school they went to and how well they did and what their GPA was. And basically what we think is all that little mirror is a big reflection that's telling all of our friends really how wonderful we are, mostly. But let me just fast forward for you, because Teresa and I have boys in their 30s now. I can tell you with all honesty, and their accomplishments are minuscule compared to their character. And when you meet people that are heartbroken, kids been in juvenile hall, kids been in prison, they've been through a marriage or two, an abortion or two, been through a lousy relationship, made some bad choices. I will tell you, there's parents that would tell you, I couldn't care if they ever went to college. I couldn't care how much money they ever made. If I just had a sane kid that loved God, loved me, told the truth, and I could trust them, I tell you what, you just think of the lowest job in the world, they could have that job, and I'd be proud of them. So the problem is you don't want to learn that late. And so, as a 40-year-old, as a 50-year-old, for some, if your parents are really old, as a 60-year-old, the journey never ends. You're still someone's kid. And your character, your godliness, how you raise your kids, your values, communicate your life. Notice Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those who deserve it. Notice those who deserve it when it's in your power to act. So we affirm them by the kind of people we become, but we also affirm them by our words and our actions. Communication. I mean, I can take you to nursing homes, and you can walk through nursing homes and you can ask people, when's the last time someone visited you? When's the last time someone visited you? When's the last time someone visited you? 10 years ago. Old people are thrown away like old shoes. And we as believers, heaven forbid, do that. But when's the last time they got a phone call? When's the last time they got a personal note? When's the last time they said, hey, you know what? I was thinking about you. I kind of went to this conference, and Mom, I just want to let you know, I've focused a lot on what you've done wrong because I have my baggage. And you know what? Boy, you did a lot right. And here, I made a list. I love you. I thank you. Dad, thanks so much. I know you struggled drinking during that season of my life, and I've had some pain, but here, Dad, thank you. I mean, when's the last time you gave him a call? Sometimes I do understand there's hurts and there's pains, but to say, every Sunday afternoon, we have a son that almost always, every Sunday afternoon, he calls us. How you doing? Everything okay? Our daughter, I don't understand the mother-daughter thing. I think they talk about every other day or sometimes more. And of course, she's a little younger and is local. But you know what it is? It's just, I don't care how old or how young, is when your kids don't communicate with you, you feel rejected. You just feel rejected. And we have the power, we have a responsibility to honor, to give respect, to have reverential awe. I mean, this sounds real trite, but without them, I got news, you wouldn't be here. Right? I mean, just do the math. So they may have been not the shining star examples that you would have loved, but without them, you wouldn't be here. So you're indebted. And God says, whether they deserve it or not, respect them, honor them. Now, we'll talk about there's times when you can't. But what we can do is communicate, be thoughtful. A daughter-in-law recently, there was actually it was a pretty big musical event, and our granddaughter was in it. And she didn't have to do this, but she called Teresa in advance. Would you like to go with us? Do you want to sit with us? She just included her. It happened to be a time I was traveling, and when you're traveling, you call, hey, how's everything going? And it was just, I could just hear her heart and her voice. It was, wow, Jenny was so thoughtful, and it was so fun. And I sat back there, and little Ryder was next to me, and what's it take to include them on some of those special events? Or okay, some of your older parents don't know how to do Skype. Set it up on their computer. I mean, it's one little click, and then let them see the faces if you have grandkids. But take some time to invest and give them, in some cases, give them what they don't deserve. Isn't that grace? Isn't that what God's done for us? So, affirmation. The second half of honoring our parents as we are grown and they're older. Notice what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 4 and 8. He says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice. How? By caring for their own family. And so, circle the word repaying. And so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Now, Paul's writing to Timothy. Timothy's a young pastor. He's going, hey, this thing about holistically caring and loving people. Man, we got all these ladies and they're widows, and, we don't have enough money to go around. Paul, what should we do? He said, well, what? Time out. The widows that are widows indeed, there's no family around, there's no kids, there's no grandkids, make sure you take care of their needs. But if they've got kids, if they've got grandkids, you tell them true religion is take care of your mom, take care of your grandma. That's where you need to do it first. And notice that word repaying. There was a time that you can't remember, and I can't remember, that you were going, and your face was all squirty, and they cut the umbilical cord, and you got dropped into someone's hands, and you were helpless and hopeless unless your parents did something for you couldn't do for yourself. Guess what? Everything goes around, comes around. There's a day that you may be here, and there's a day where your parents may get there. What they did for you, you now do for them. Take care of them. We commit financially to provide for the needs of our aging parents. That's biblical. Now, You got to figure out whether that's in the house, whether that's through money, whether that's through assisted living. There's multiple ways, and I know multiple issues. But at the end of the day, you need to know honoring my mother and father is I stand in the gap, and I've got to figure a way to take care of them in their twilight years. He goes on to say in verse 8, if anyone doesn't provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So this isn't like a mild little command that he's on the side. This is important. This is pretty radical. Okay, quick review, and then I want to highlight some things because your faces tell me you don't understand what my dad did to me, or I'm not sure I could ever do that, okay? There are some times when you can't honor your parents. But by way of review, are you ready? We're commanded to honor our mother and father. What's a child to do? When you're small, you obey them. When you're a teenager, young adult, you respect and cooperate with them, even if you disagree. When you're an adult, you affirm by your life and your words, and you provide for them. Now, there's 4 times, I think, from Scripture that you can't honor them the way that God wants you to, and that he commands us to because of extenuating circumstances. And I'm not going to go into all the passages, but if it strikes a chord, they're very direct. You can read them, and it will not take, like an exegetical genius to figure out what it means. You'll read it, and you'll say, I get it. First time that you cannot honor your parents is the priority of salvation. Mark 10:23-31. Jesus makes it very clear. There's going to be times where someone wants to come to faith, and your parents are going to say, don't believe in Jesus. Do not believe in the gospel. I remember a young Jewish guy this happened to. His father says, you believe in Jesus as the Messiah, I'll have a funeral for you, and I'll disinherit you. Well, should he honor his father's wishes? No. He trusted in Christ. He was separated from his family. There's a price to pay. In the early church, there was a price to pay. And so there are times where on the priority of salvation, we say, I'd love to honor you, but I have to honor God and his word first. Second is the priority of service. There's times where, I could tell you a million stories of some young person, college age or a little after, feels very called of God to either go to the mission field or go, and nope, can't do that. Boy, that job will never pay. We didn't send you to that school to end up doing some ministry stuff, and we're against it. If God calls you to do something, you can't let your parents' view hinder you from obeying God. Third is the priority of marriage. There are times where you try to leave, right? The biblical model, leave, cleave, become one flesh. You try and leave, and you have parents that meddle with your life. And sometimes they do it with money, and sometimes they do it with phone calls, and sometimes they just keep jacking around with your life. And when it gets between your parents and your mate always wins. It's the priority of marriage. Teresa's dad was, she didn't have the most pleasant of all childhoods, and so that sort of carried on early in our marriage, and I didn't know how to handle it, and he would come and criticize and criticize and criticize and criticize and criticize, and she'd be depressed for 2 or 3 weeks every time after her parents left. And I didn't know what to do with it, and on my end, my parents, we had pretty dysfunctional families, actually, as I shared earlier. And so I think mostly my father, but he couldn't let go, and so he would call our house person to person. Remember the old days when you could make a phone call person to person? So Teresa answers the phone, here's my dad or my mom, someone on the other end, an operator going, will you receive a person-to-person call for Chip Ingram? Translation, we don't want to talk to you. I mean, how rejecting could you be? So, we've got this, and I like to tell this story like I'm really the strong, brave hero who steps in and protects my wife. I was really slow, and I felt between the rock and the hard place. And, first of all, I was a little afraid of her dad, and I didn't want to disappoint my dad. And we had yicky. This was like not working. And I just realized, something? If honoring parents, obeying God, you obey God and honor your wife. And so I had a phone call with my dad. I said, Dad, let me tell you something. You call like that anymore, you're not welcome in my house. It's a package, okay? We became one. Me, Teresa, and the kids. You can love us all or none. But you can't, this isn't a salad bar. You can't just pick one person to love out of the family. So you're welcome. Would love to have a relationship with you. Don't ever do that. Don't call that way ever again. With her dad, he came to visit, and after one day, he started on the routine. That faucet's leaky. These knives aren't sharp enough. Yeah. And so I said, Fred, come on, let's go to Safeway. I got to pick up milk and bread. And so we do, and we get back, and I'm working up the courage the whole time. Okay, work up the courage. Finally, I work up the courage, and I said, Fred, don't get out of the car yet. Yeah. Fred, let me tell you something, okay? Your daughter, I know you don't mean it because you're oblivious to it, but you're very, very critical of your daughter. And you have been her whole life. That really has affected her. and Fred, when you do this, it actually affects me. Because she gets really discouraged and depressed because she doesn't think she measures up because you keep telling her that. Help me, Lord. Fred, we're going to go in that house, and if you say one critical word to my wife, you will be on a plane in 2 hours, and you will not be welcome to come back until you can come back with positive, encouraging words for her. Now fake it. Do you understand? Act tough. And he looked at me like someone hit him in the face with a sledgehammer, and he walked in that house, and he was not critical to my wife anymore. But some of us, it's just, some of that's with a mother-in-law. Some of it's, those issues when your people are trying, and maybe it's a sister, maybe it's a brother, but the priority of marriage, no one gets between you and your mate, and you do not honor your parents if they behave in those kind of ways. The last and final way is just the priority of wisdom. Some of you come from backgrounds where there's been an abusive relationship, either sexually or physically. There's been alcohol, drugs, violent anger, outbursts. You've had situations where you went out for a little while and you come back and your children were endangered, and you just realize, oh my lands, they weren't even, it's 3 years old, they weren't watching them, and there's a pool in the back, or they're sort of half sauced. They play games, they manipulate. There are certain times where wisdom says, and you've addressed it, and every time you try and address it, it's fire and there's arguments, and it's chaos. And you've tried and tried and tried. There's times where you set a boundary around your family, and because of the dysfunction of other people, you say, we love you, we honor the office, but until these behaviors change, we won't be here for Thanksgiving. The grandkids won't be here at Christmas, and you're not welcome in our home. This kind of behavior, you know what? You can't come with, your vodka and your orange juice deal and get sauced at my house. You can't come and fall asleep in bed smoking. You're not going to do stuff that endanger me or my family and dishonor God. And I will tell you, that is so hard to do. And most Christians feel so guilty, as though, notice what it says in Proverbs 9. It says, he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. I mean, when before your heart you've tried everything you can do to make things right, and the response is insults, and the response is more dysfunction, don't reprove a scoffer unless he hates you. Reprove a wise man and he'll love you. Give instruction to a wise man and he'll be still wiser. Teach a righteous man and he'll increase his learning. And this is, by the way, I would talk to your pastor. In some cases, I talk with a really good counselor. There are certain things and certain people and certain buttons that keep messing with your life, your family, your marriage, and your children. And at some point, you pray it through. Enough is enough, and you set some boundaries. And there's an opportunity. When these behaviors change, we'll re-engage. Until then, we're not going to. Very tough. Very important. Honoring your parents does not mean you obey them as adults. Honoring your parents does not mean there's warm, fuzzy feelings and you do what they want. Honoring your parents as an adult means you affirm their good, forgive their bad, and have as much relationship as possible that doesn't violate the priority of service, your marriage, wisdom, or salvation. You say to them, regardless of what you've done, I'm committed to provide for you financially. And I want to be a reflection of Christ. But it has to be inside certain boundaries that honor God as well as you.
As we close today's program, this is one of those times I wish I could come right through that screen and sit down with you and grab a cup of coffee and say, tell me about what's going through your mind right now. When you talk to adult children about their relationships with their parents, it just stirs up all kind of sticky, sometimes very painful things. I can't tell you how many adults I've talked to that have really unresolved issues and they're stuck. And so I want to talk to you very directly and give you kind of a quick game plan. Number one, if you're stuck, if some things started coming up and guilt and anger or bitterness, or you're just disenfranchised and trying to keep your folks away from your kids, and there's just stuff and you're stuck, go talk to a pastor or a wise Christian counselor. I mean, it'll be the best money you ever spend. But for many of you, you don't really need that. You just need to process it. You haven't talked about it. In fact, you've sort of shoved it down and you're not honoring your mother and your father and you're disobeying God, but you just don't feel like you can. Well, you can, but you can do it with boundaries and you can do it with wisdom and you can get unstuck and you can break the chain for your kids. And the way to do that is get this DVD series and find 2 or 3 couples, maybe 4, and you say, you know something, let's address this. Let's not pass this kind of stuff on to our kids. When they're 30 and 40, they're going to be talking about us the way we're talking about our kids. Let's break the cycle. And then finally, maybe you just need to take a little time and own your part of it. I know, my dad was an alcoholic growing up. He wasn't a Christian, and, he's kind of a good guy in general, but he could never verbalize he loved me. And in my early to mid-30s, I spent most of my life with my young kids whining and blaming him for what he couldn't give me and what he didn't give me. And, I remember getting sort of in his moccasins, if you will, and discovering that his dad died when he was 13, and he'd been through a war, and he couldn't give me some things. And I just owned my part of it and realized, I wasn't exactly the greatest, most responsive son, but I always just blamed him. And I remember owning my stuff, getting forgiveness for me, and choosing to give my dad what he needed, even though I wasn't getting what I wanted or needed. And you know what happened? I grew up. And for some of you, that's going to be a part of the process. Are you ready? Don't let this go. Tackle it today and get some help.